Welcome to the Great British Foreign Affairs Podcast, hosting insightful conversations with fascinating people to shape the way that Britain interacts with the world. In this bonus suitcase episode, I chat with Hannah Methven, who is a sustainability specialist at Explore, the adventure travel company, and a big fan of train travel. This travel episode leads us nicely towards the Easter holidays and the end of Series 2 of the podcast, which will take a break over Easter and be back later in April with Series 3. In this conversation, we get inspiration, tips and tricks on exploring the world by train. So hi, Hannah. Welcome to the podcast. We're jumping into another bonus suitcase episode for the podcast. And this time it is all about train travel. In fact, I think it's the beginning of many on train travel because this is a mode of travel that I absolutely love, but also it's an expanding, increasing trend in travel. And it's something I think we're all going to embrace more and more as we go forward. So I'd love you to introduce yourself to start off. Just tell me where you're from, what you've worked in, what you do now.
Thank you so much for having me. I love trains so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So my background has been in travel. Been lucky enough to work in the adventure travel industry for the past 24 years, which has actually flown by. I grew up down in Devon and moved away straight after university. I grew up in a really fantastic place down on the coast, which I think began my love of trains. And yeah, I've worked in adventure travel ever since, and I've been really fortunate to travel fairly far and wide. Lots of that by flying, but I'm really sort of getting back to what feels like the roots of going by trains these days, and it's opening up a slightly different style of travel for me, which I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about that. Where did that interest or passion for train travel first come from? Or even how did it get reignited recently?
Well, I think it started essentially. I grew up in a really cool place. I grew up on the English Riviera, and there were two particular train routes that I loved. The Dartmouth Steam Railway went right past my house, and right past my school, so I would wave to that, I kid you not, every single day. And then the South Devon Railway, which runs from Buckfastleigh to Totnes. My granddad actually volunteered at one of the stations, so we were always on there. So these two, but the other side of it probably came from the fact I actually get car sick. Going on a train, I could sit and look out the window. I could read my book. Oh my goodness, what a joy. I could snack. I never felt sick. So it kind of was the way of travel I was drawn to because I felt great while I was doing it. I just like the fact I could rock up to a train station and buy a ticket and go pretty much wherever I wanted. And I've still been very much like that over the years. I will always prefer to get the train if I can, mostly because it's just easier. Like driving for me, I have to really think. You've got to concentrate the whole time. You can't drift off, but you can when you're on a train. So I've sort of stuck with that. And I guess for holidays, it was always a big part of that. But then when low-cost flights came in, and you could suddenly hop on a flight and be somewhere for an incredibly small amount of money, it drifted sort of to the back seat a little bit. And I think what's changed that recently is I know a lot more now. My background at work is in product development and designing adventure travel holidays, which is very cool. But I've moved more in the last 3 years into sustainability, and that's sort of looking at it, thinking, I've been lucky enough to travel so much in my life, and I want people, the next generations, to be able to do the same thing. So there comes that sort of learning side of going, oh, actually, maybe there's a different way. Maybe I can choose a slightly less impactful option. And that's got me back into thinking, I still want to travel, always. I'm never going to stop. But how can I do it and scale back that impact? So I've sort of got back to looking, where can I get by train? And obviously being based in the UK, we've got some really great train connections. So I sort of look at one, plan a trip, and then all of a sudden I've got 10 more on my wish list.
I love that. Absolutely. It's something really, I mean, we're just lucky, aren't we? With the location of the UK or in mainland Europe, the idea that you can literally go to your capital's train station and get to many countries from there is quite spectacular, and is something that we should be really taking advantage of and can. So tell us, where have you travelled to recently? And tell us about that journey, a fun train journey you've done recently.
Well, I've done a few relatively short ones, but actually one that I'd really love to share is I did quite a big chunky journey last year from London down to Marrakesh. And it came about when I was actually already on a train adventure in France with a friend. And my boss at work phoned me and said, there's a business trip in Morocco. We want 8 of you to go down, meet the local operator that we work with, meet our tour leaders, test out some new things. Did I want to go along? And I was like, absolutely. Yes, of course I do. And immediately I thought, I really want to go by train because Explore, the company that I work for, I've got this incredible journey, London to Marrakesh, but it's 21 days. I mean, I didn't have 21 days of holiday left, but I did have the bones of this train journey that I knew that I could pull together without having to spend weeks researching it. I had 5 days of holiday left, so I was like, oh, can I do it? Can I get there in 5 days and still enjoy the journey? And I could, thank goodness. I use that itinerary extensively, but also a website that I love, seat61.com. I think anyone who loves train travel, just that is such a great resource.
Let's just explain that. That's so the website is seat61.com, and it's man in seat 61, isn't it? That's what he calls himself. And just to explain what's on that website, why it's so good.
So it's full of almost any bit of information you could want on a train route. And it's not just train travel in Europe, there's train travel in countries all around the world that have good, strong networks. And the reason I like it is it gives you, it's not a buying platform for you to get your tickets, but it gives you all the different options for routes. And obviously you can still find alternatives, but each journey, so when I was looking at London to Marrakesh, the initial suggestion was to go London down to Barcelona. And I was like, oh, I've been to Barcelona and I fancy doing something different. So I looked, okay, could I go down through the south of France and stop there? So I ended up going to Bordeaux. So it gives you routes and timings and tips, but it also shows you what the trains are going to be like. For some people, this is, if you've never done a train journey, you're thinking, how am I going to find the platform if I don't speak the language? What's the train going to look like? All those small things that could put you off. But it tells you tips on where to change platforms quickly at big stations, what platforms the trains might come into, just all those little bits of info that can actually put your mind at rest, and you can use the planning routes that are already set up. So it's just such a resource. Everyone should look at it. But the trouble with it is you need to sit down with a cup of tea and some snacks, because I kid you not, I look and I think I'll just quickly look on this website, and then 2 hours have gone by and I've got 4 new holidays planned.
I do the same. I love that. So you decided to go down to Bordeaux.
Yeah. So I essentially, because I only had 5 days of annual leave, I did a flyby trip. So I wanted to get as far down as I could on the first day without having to get up in the middle of the night. I'm not a fan of really early alarm clocks. So I was trying to work out, could I do it and still make it enjoyable? You don't want it to feel like a massive long route march. So yeah, my first night, I changed in Paris and got a high-speed train down to Bordeaux. I left my house at about 7 in the morning, and I'm an hour and a half out of London, so I had a little journey before. But I checked into my hotel in Bordeaux at 6 o'clock, and by 6:30 I already had a glass of red in my hand, and I was a very happy lady. So I just had one night there, and then I really wanted to spend time in San Sebastian. It was somewhere I'd heard of, but I'd never been to. And the journey the next morning, was so quick. It's 2 hours again, a high-speed train. Just turn up there every half an hour, and then a really quick 25-minute metro down into San Sebastian. And I took a 7 a.m. train again, and I've just said I don't like early mornings, but maybe I do, because I wanted to get there as early in the day as possible, because I still only had one night there. And for me, this is one of the things I really love about taking the train versus flying, is I arrived in the middle of the city, because on the whole, train stations are fairly central. So I didn't need transfers. Within 10 minutes, I'd found where my hotel was, and I'd ditched my bag and I was out exploring. And San Sebastian actually is on my wish list for this summer, because you can get there in a full day. If you brave an early morning start, and sort of the 6:30, 7 a.m. Eurostar, you can be there by about 8:30 at night, just in time to go out, get a beer, maybe some pinchos, and just relax into a few days there. So
amazing tapas there, right? Pinchos,
so good,
as they're called there, and it goes right into the night, isn't it? So you're right.
Yes,
You could arrive at 8:30, and you could
go straight out.
you could really enjoy yourself that evening as a celebration.
Definitely. And the Spanish rail network it was the first time I'd really travelled by rail between cities there, and it was fantastic. I don't really know what I was expecting, but I didn't expect it to be so busy and well used. So I actually ended up on a 5 a.m. train from San Sebastian to Madrid, due to some rather relaxed booking processes on my behalf. I left it really late, just thinking, oh, it'd be fine. There's 3 train options that day, and the only train I could get a seat on was the 5 a.m. But actually, it worked out so well. My alarm went off, and I hated life because it was 4 a.m. But I got onto the train. It was packed. Everyone did the same. We all rolled up our jumpers and went to sleep. And I arrived in Madrid 4 hours before the train that I was thinking of getting. So actually, I just got more time in another city. All of the trains that I used on this journey were allocated seating. So I never had that worry of, am I going to get on the train? Is it going to be a bit of a bun fight to get a seat? Everyone on the big intercity trains, you've got your own seat. So it's really casual and relaxed. So I arrived again in Madrid, and I just got straight out to sightseeing, and it's just a really lovely, relaxed way of traveling. It's not without its I was going to say challenges, but actually, this is probably why I love train travel. The following day, when I was going down to the south of Spain to Algeciras, that was where I was going to get my ferry to Morocco. I found my train, I found the platform, I'd got a really good picnic, always really important for a train journey, in my opinion. And I sat down, and as the train pulled out, those screens that are on the carriages came up, and mine said Madrid to Malaga. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to Malaga. Malaga's a couple of hours up the coast. This is interesting. And there was a long announcement, and my Spanish is poor at best. But I could tell that the train was definitely going to Malaga, so I sort of sat there, and I was obviously frowning. And this couple came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I'm not sure. Are we going to Malaga? And they were like, yeah. But then they explained that there was actually a rail replacement bus, which made me laugh, because that's such a thing in the UK, isn't it? I never expected to have it on this trip. But they'd taken their time. I hadn't at that point asked them for help. I would have absolutely asked someone to help me figure out what was going on. But they came over to me, said, "You look like you don't know what's going on." I took that positively. And then when we got to Malaga, they actually took the time to make sure that I got on the right bus. And you just kind of think that's the connection that you would get traveling on train. I mean, you'd hope on a flight you wouldn't have a rail replacement bus, but people look out for each other. And then we got chatting, we have a bit of, why are you going here? Where are you going? And you just have that experience that forms part of your journey. And sometimes you just need a little reminder that there are lovely people in the world. So having that happen to you, I think it's a lovely way of connecting when you travel, that's slightly different to going to a site and seeing something, or going to a restaurant. You connect with real people.
Yeah, this is amazing. So following your trip, you've already at this stage passed through Paris, beautiful Paris. You've gone down to the Grand Ville of Bordeaux in the winemaking region. You've then got to San Sebastian, which is tapas, outside, Spanish vibe, coastal cove, isn't it? The town city on the coast. You've then got to Madrid, which you walk out into, and that city is kind of wow, isn't it? Lots of British haven't been to Madrid because they go to Barcelona and other parts of Spain, don't they? And
it was my first visit.
You're right. It's grand and it's beautiful, and you've got the Iberian ham, and you've got the tortilla and all the amazing food and drink. Flamenco is obviously very strong there, isn't it? And very friendly. And where did you just say you've got to? So you've got a railway replacement bus, and where did you arrive at?
I arrived down at Algeciras, so it's right at the southern tip of Spain. It was really cool, actually. I had very little time there because the train down from Madrid, there was only one option on the day that I needed to go to, and it got me there at about 8:30 in the evening. And my ferry the next morning was 8 o'clock, I want to say. So it was very much go for dinner, get some sleep, get on the ferry. But it's a really nice, simple port town, and you've got the connection to Morocco is just 1 hour on a super fast catamaran. You kind of think that's nothing. You're changing continents, and for me, that was a really good moment in the journey where I got onto the ferry, and you do passport control on the boat. I don't know why I didn't expect that, but I was like, you queue up, you get your passport stamped. I bought a coffee, and by the time I'd sat back down, I could see Tangier in the distance. And I was just thinking, I'm almost in North Africa, and I only left London at this point. I've been travelling, this is my 5th day. And you think of all of that distance that you cover, like you say, the different cities, the different vibes each of them have, the different food. I ate so much great food along the way. And then I land in North Africa. And as I got off the ferry, I was walking up you call it up the slope to come out. And I could not stop smiling because I hadn't really done a journey like that before that felt so epic. And to be able to do that on, just 5 days of your time. I had a really simple ticket for most of the journey. I used an Interrail pass. I got my first Interrail pass last year at the grand age of 44. They're not just for teenagers. They're a really great way of travelling around Europe. And the trains in Morocco were so simple as well. I just booked online. The first train from Tangier down to Casablanca was an old TGV train, so it was a double-decker. And I sat upstairs looking out of the window, just watching a completely new, different landscape. And we followed the coast for a lot of that journey. And then I switched and took the last train down to Marrakesh. And that was quite an old sort of romantic style carriage. So there were the little cabins with 6 seats in there. And again, I just chatted to the people that I was travelling with. Where were they going? How long had they been there? A really interesting mix of people in my carriage. And I wouldn't have done that if I'd been on a flight. And for me, I think the thing that I really love is I'm always excited to travel somewhere, either somewhere new, somewhere I really want to get back to. That feeling never shifts. But when I fly, I don't particularly enjoy the journey. I'm okay with flying, but it is what it is, isn't it? You go up, you read a few books, you land. But I felt like I'd had a holiday on the way to this holiday in Morocco by traveling by train. And that's, I think, the way people need to reframe it. And that love of slowing things down is coming back now. And I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, slowing it down. And I like the way you've talked about making the most of where you want to go as well. It's like, it's not necessarily planning, saying, right, the most efficient way. I mean, we are always trying to balance time with arriving, but that idea that it's very much part of your holiday. The journey is part of the holiday, and you can deviate or go via the cities that you don't know or that you want to experience again. So that idea of really building it in, I liked what you did around the timings of the trains, so that you got chunks of time in certain places.
And I think it's one of the things that works really well on other journeys that I've done. Taking a sleeper train is a fantastic way. And people will say, oh, but you won't get any sleep. And you might not. I actually find being on a train and that motion and the noise that they make really, really relaxing. My partner, absolutely not. He doesn't get any sleep whatsoever. But it's such a good way of getting from A to B. You save a night on your accommodation, and you don't get the views necessarily depending on the time of year, but you still get a great experience. And it makes me think of I've done lots of sleeper trains, I'm a huge fan, but my favourite experience on one was probably in China, where we were travelling from Beijing up to Harbin for the ice festival. It was the middle of winter, really cold, very exciting trip. I highly recommend it. And we got on and we got into this sleeper berth. There were four of us in there, me and my husband and two locals. And one of the people in the cabin with us was an older gentleman, and he looked quite stern. And my Mandarin is non-existent. We have a phrase book, but I'm not very skilled at it. So I thought, oh, this is going to be hard to make a connection. It could be quite a long journey. And so we sat there for a little while, and then I got hungry, as I always do. So we rummaged around in our bags, and pot noodles in China are not what they are here. Everyone on a long distance train journey has them. They're really delicious. So we dug ours out of our bag, and this man's face, honestly, it just lit up. And he rummaged in his bag and got exactly the same thing out. So we all shuffled to the end of the carriage, and they have these hot water taps so everyone can make their noodles and their tea. And we had dinner together, and we still couldn't communicate at all. And I mean, I did try with the phrase book, but it wasn't going so well. But it just felt completely different atmosphere in the cabin, and we'd made a very simple but small connection with someone. And I look back at that really fondly. And again, it's an experience that I wouldn't have had if I was on a flight or if I was driving from place to place, possibly even, just on shorter train journeys, because you might just look out the window and enjoy it. So it's looking at what works for your itinerary, and time is so precious these days. I think we're all so busy. I think about when I go for a walk, I'll be like, oh, I must listen to that podcast that's been on my list for ages. Or I might call my mum, or I'm doing two things at once all the time. And I think that's the real beauty of train travel is once you're on it, you can't do anything other than go with the flow, go with the journey. But you can stroll up and down, you can snack, you can look out the window, you can read, and you're sort of almost forced to relax. And sometimes I think we need that little nudge to be like, it's okay to chill out, enjoy this journey.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favourite things, that impetus to slow down. Like even the way that the motion of the train slows you, doesn't it? And you do just have hours, and you can look out the window for a bit, and actually you can find all sorts of really fun things to do, can't you? Just invent, it's like you're looking out and you walk down, you might go into the buffet car if these on these longer distance trains. You, as you say, you connect with somebody. That was like an unexpected joy in the middle of the journey. I was going to comment that, I mean, the sleeper trains for families are absolutely incredible. Train travel might feel a bit overwhelming for families, but actually, if you arm yourself with the information, as you say, and that is available around platforms and times, and you sort of embrace a little bit of that uncomfortableness that you've got to get a lot of people on a train all of a sudden. The experience of the sleeper cabin, I think there is almost nothing like it. If you book out the whole cabin as a family, then that moment when you go into it and everyone's scrabbling around, they're trying to pull the beds down, find the little pockets that you can put things in, put the suitcases in different places, just like utter joy for kids, that moment of exploring a cabin that you're going to then live in for the next night. So I think that is a real encouragement. You can be travelling alone, you can be travelling with other people, you can be travelling as a family, you can be all sorts of different ages, and you can really enjoy train travel, can't you? But you mentioned Interrail. I just wanted to come back to that, because just tell us a little bit about what you discovered about Interrail. When's it useful? how to do it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a revelation for me because I didn't do a gap year or an interrailing journey when I was in my teens. I went straight from school to uni and then straight into work. And I'd done a lot of train journeys where I just booked point to point tickets. And then I was looking at this journey in France where we were going to be there for 10 days or so. And we had some fixed plans. But my friend said, actually, I think a rail pass, let's look into them. And there were lots of different options. And actually, she was doing a whole month and got a multi country pass. She went on after me, but you can buy a package. So I bought a 5-day pass just for France only. And you can use it really structured. So we had certain journeys we knew we wanted to make. From Paris down to Avignon was one of them, and then Avignon over to Grasse, which was where we were going to spend a few days. But then you can also break a journey up. So you select a day that you're going to travel on, and high speed trains between the cities, you book your seat. It's the same as my London to Morocco journey. You have a seat reservation, you book it, and you're locked into that. But then other journeys, so we travelled the day we were going from Avignon to Grasse, were just regular in between town shuttle trains, no seat reservations needed. So you just say, I want to travel on this day, and you can do as many journeys on that day as you wish to cram in. So we sort of said, oh, look at the train route. We're going via Marseille. Should we stop for lunch in Marseille? And it gives you that sense of flexibility. And we had journeys that we didn't actually use our pass for. So we had a couple of short evenings where we went down to the beach and we'd get the local train, but it was about €2 a ticket. So actually, they're a really good way of sort of giving you lots of flexibility, lots of comfort and stability, knowing you've got your key journeys locked in and your seats reserved. But you can just decide one day to say, oh, we're going here on the train, and you just activate it. It's all done on your phone these days. I mean, I think I would have been scared in the days of carrying a paper pass around and not losing that or getting it wet. But you can map out routes. And I did that for my London to Morocco journey. You use the app and say, shall I do this? And it gives you the train times. So handy because you can visualize it. I'm quite a visual person. I like to see a map of where I'm going. But you can also then look and say, oh, actually, this place looks fun. Maybe I'll break the journey here. And that sort of worked when I was looking and deciding I didn't need to go back to Barcelona. I wanted to go somewhere else. Had I had more time, there are a whole heap of places I've identified that I need to go back to. And I would say, if people are looking at the passes, what I would always do is compare the cost, because you need to look at your trip. And on my London to Morocco, I had fixed days where I was travelling and I had trains that I needed to book on, and I didn't have a lot of wiggle room, which was worrying sometimes. But if you've got more flexibility, the pass gives you that. So it's worth costing up both and sort of saying, well, actually, what's going to give me the best option for this holiday? And it will be different on different times. I did a journey down to Munich a few years ago, and I'm repeating it later this year. And I just booked point-to-point tickets for each of it because I needed to be on those specific trains. And one was a sleeper train back to Cologne. But if I had a bit more time, booking a 2-country rail pass would give me masses of flexibility. So, yeah, the big take home for me was discovering they're not just for 18 to 30-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had my eye on them to try out. That's actually amazing about the app, that you can map it out. That sounds quite inspiring, actually, that you can use it as a way to discover even more. So we've heard about your Morocco trip. We've heard a little bit about China. Are there any other, real memories that you have of train travel that you always think of, your sort of favourite memories?
So many. And actually, 2 really spring to mind. One of my favourite countries to explore is India, and their rail network is it's a thing of great beauty because it is used by regular people all day, every day. Millions travel on it every day. So it's an experience that I think if you're going to the country, you should really include. And two actual journeys in India spring to mind. The first one was, I always try and take something to help connect with people. And on this particular time, I was knitting. I was trying to knit a blanket for someone. And so I had these little squares that I was knitting, and a little girl came up to me and she's like, "Auntie, what are you knitting?" And so I started chatting to her, and then I started trying to teach her to knit. And by chatting to her, I obviously got chatting to her parents and her siblings. And it's just this simple thing, in that natural curiosity of a child coming up to ask, always just sort of gives you a really great connection. And probably my second favourite India journey was, I'd taken my mum and my auntie out to India, and we were getting a train back to Delhi, and I knew that we weren't sat together because just the way we'd booked it, we were, all three of us were in different carriages. And I've travelled there a lot and I'm very comfortable with it. But I didn't know how my mum and my auntie would feel just being on their own and left to their own devices. So we got on the train and I got them both sat down and I went back to my seat. And after about half an hour, I thought, I'll go check on them, see how they're doing. I go to the carriage where my mum is, and she's having this in-depth conversation about where she does her shopping, what she buys each week, and how much it costs. I'm like, she's fine. And then I go a couple of carriages the other way and find my auntie is mid huge lunch with the family that she's sat with. And at the end of it, we'd all had these different experiences, and everyone had had a great time, and everyone had met people that, had the three of us been sat together, we still would have chatted, but we probably would have chatted more to ourselves, particularly because it was at the end of our trip, so we would have been able to talk about what we'd done and what we'd seen. But because we were individuals, we were almost far more embracing of chatting to other people. And I just think that experience for me, but also for both of them, is really, really just, it's a really fond memory. And probably one more, if you'll indulge me, and I'll share it with you.
Yes, please.
A similar situation when I was in France with a friend, and I'd decided to join her holiday quite last minute. So we were on the same train, but again, we were 3 or 4 carriages apart. And it was a packed train, so there was no running backwards and forwards to each other all the time. So your point of view can do things and you can engage with what's going on. We decided that we would play I Spy to practice our French, because GCSE French was a long time ago for me. So we sat and we played I Spy in French via WhatsApp. And if you imagine, on a train, you're passing things and you're, oh, that'll do. But of course, then it's gone. So there's quite a lot of thought that goes into it. And honestly, the fun of just being on that journey and playing that really silly, childish game. But for if you're traveling with families, there's things like that. I remember that from being a kid. I Spy with my big brother. It's just much more sort of fun and engaging than sitting in the back of the car, where I swear all we did was squabble. But on a train, we seemed to get on. I don't know the science behind it.
Yeah, I think the thing about engaging with children, particularly being good at connecting, it really makes me think of my husband and I took our eldest daughter, when she was 18 months, on the Trans-Siberian, and so Trans-Mongolian, so from Moscow through Siberia, Mongolia, then getting to China. But the amazing thing was, in a similar way to how you're describing in India, is across Russia, that train's used by locals transporting goods, going from city to city, and the Russian people loved children, and so we just kept getting given presents. I mean, we were giving my daughter was giving apples, sweets, little things to eat, toys. Like, other children were playing with her, people were interacting with her. The older people were, loved kind of trying to interact, and what a beautiful. There were so many beautiful moments, and each of those is, as you say, human interaction, isn't it? And it's interaction with people that it's not touristy. You're not in a tourist bubble at that point. Are you going to see whatever monument, which of course, can also be good, but you're just in normal life, experiencing normal things, often through food.
Often.
I notice that our stories involve a lot of food, don't they?
And that's so lovely, isn't it? You end up
But what a
sharing with
privilege.
people and, yeah, connecting with people that you would not meet in a different situation. It's a real privilege.
It's an amazing way to experience the world. And yeah, I mean, let's talk about that just a little bit. You've described this sort of, I guess, trend right now as falling back in love with train travel. And some of these things we're talking about, it's just because it's a very different type of travel. This slowing down, these connections, things going wrong that you have to sudden or like panic when you think you've got it wrong or the train's wrong, and those moments of getting to know yourself better, I would describe them as. Yeah, tell us more about how you see that in terms of the benefits that we experience as we take this kind of less expected travel, I guess, less predictable travel.
I think there's so many benefits to it. And the slowing down, I don't think we can underestimate how much we need that, because we are all doing a million things every single day. And all of those decisions that we need to make during the day, however small they might be, they are building up. And we rarely let ourselves stop these days. People feel bad for taking downtime, or, I'm just having a lazy day. No, you're just resting and enjoying and recovering and experiencing just a bit of chill time. So I think going by train almost, it forces you to do that. And because of the way you're at ground level, you've hopefully got a nice decent window, but you can usually see something and you can get up and walk around. You've got a slight connection with the landscape outside. You can't physically touch it, but you can see it and you can watch whatever it is going past. We spoke about that movement of the train and the noise that it makes. It's quite relaxing and almost a bit like white noise. But I think there's an element of, we like to feel like we're learning something from our holidays, and that could be as simple as the effort it takes to plan a train trip is more than it takes to book a flight. And I think that's a really positive experience because, well, my background is in planning trips, so obviously I love it. But looking at something and saying, I'm here and I want to be there, how do I get there? And then when you get there, you get this really positive sort of experience of going, I made this happen, because I had to pick the trains that I thought I'd go on. I had to find the platforms and make the connections and find my seat. I had to squeeze my luggage on because I'd overpacked. It always happens. And then you find your hotel. And these days, I think we're very lucky because we do have lots of tools to help us do that. I mean, my phone was a godsend when, strangely enough, working in travel, I've not got a brilliant sense of direction. So I will come out of a train station and immediately turn the wrong way. I don't know why, but I'll turn the wrong way with great confidence too. But having these tools, so, even language now is not the barrier it was, because Google Translate is a massive help if you're looking at signs or you need to ask someone. So I think it gives us that opportunity to slow down and to enjoy the journey, but it also gives you a real sense of accomplishment when you get to your destination, because you've had to make that happen. And it's very easy to go online and book a flight in one click. And I still get a big thrill of doing that, especially if it's somewhere really cool that I'm going to. But a train journey, it just feels longer from start to finish. And I think it's really good for our mental health to do that, to spend that time to think about what's important to us and those destinations that you might think, actually, do I want to cover a long distance and feel epic because I've changed continents? Or do I want to, on my list again for the summer, is to get back to Bordeaux. I can get there in a day, and then I want to spend a good week or so just pottering around. It's a beautiful city. And yeah, I think it's that skill of having to do something for yourself and feeling proud of it.
You can embrace that, can't you, as well? That slow, especially when you're going on the longer journeys, that slowing down. I think you can really embrace it. You can pick out like a really great book you want to read from start to finish, can't you? And take a journal and kind of thing that helps you reflect and actually help yourself slow down almost, can't you? Or like a challenge for yourself in terms of photography, like what you're documenting what you're seeing or trying to get a nice shot. These are really nice ways to embrace the slowing down, aren't they? And I think for people that are really interested in the world, which a lot of people that do this kind of travel are, and of course the listeners of the podcast are, following keenly international events and the way that countries relate to each other. That's an incredible way to do it. I remember when we did the Trans-Siberian Express, I took a Russian literature as sort of one of the greats with me to read, but also there was a book that was people that had written about that journey, that very journey, but back through the centuries. So you could read between wherever it was, Moscow and Ekaterinburg, something that someone had written in 1900 something, their own literary great piece or letter as you travelled. And there are these things you can add, I think, in terms of your developing your understanding of where you're going. Both you've got those direct interactions with people, and then you can also be quite deliberate about learning about the history, about the place, about the country you're passing through. And it's very that's an amazing way to absorb, I think, the world, really, isn't it? And then I think we should, because we're both talking about how we love this, but I'm sure that there have been moments where you get travel anxiety, right? Where everything seems stressful, you haven't had enough sleep, something's going wrong, you have no idea where you're supposed to be going, and it's in a different language. And you see a train departing the station, you really hope it wasn't yours, because if you've missed it, you've got to wait another day or something. So there's also these moments where you really bat up against yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
And well, you must be very good at dealing with those moments.
I think those are also the moments that at the time, oh my goodness, when you can feel your heart racing because you are like, is that my train? Or when you've run and got on a train and then you're suddenly like, oh my goodness, I've got, yeah, where am I going? I have had a few moments like that, but I think I am probably quite stressed about connections and things like that. So to take the stress out of it, I usually try and give myself way more time than I need. So my journey down to Bordeaux, I actually gave myself close to 3 hours to change in Paris. And I didn't really see it as a bad thing because I knew if my Eurostar was delayed, I had plenty of time. I knew that I could get to Montparnasse station in about 15, 20 minutes. So I got there, figured out where I needed to be, figured out where my train was going from, and then I went for lunch and had a delicious lunch, followed by an equally delicious cake. And I just took my time. And I think that's probably 10 years ago, I wouldn't have done that. And I would have tried to smush in as much as possible. And then you realise that worry, when your train is showing, oh, the one I'm on is 10 minutes late, my connection's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I've realised now that that's just not for me. And I would rather see less places on a trip and see it in a more chilled out feeling. So you can't plan for everything, but I think just trying not to do too much is my top tip for keeping the stress levels low.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to get onto that tips and advice, because I mean, you've already given quite a few and they're so useful. You covered picnic, make sure you get food, things like the Seat 61 and Interrail, but also Google Translate and like making the most of, and obviously maps and kind of everything that your phone can help with. What other tips and advice would you give people who have probably done a little bit of train travel, but are probably looking at, because of climate change, because of how serious we need to take our sort of travelling habits, thinking that they'd like to dive in a bit more to this type of travel?
Oh, so many good things. The first thing is probably more further down the line, but I would always say pack as light as you possibly can when you're on a train, because you mentioned it earlier. There are some trains, if you're not at the start of the line, where you are leaping on quite quickly or leaping off quite quickly. And what I found has really helped me is packing really, really light. The best trips I've had are where I've had three things to choose from. I don't have to think about what I'm wearing in the morning. It's whatever's clean, but you've got less. And if you can travel with a rucksack, getting on and off a train, particularly if you suddenly have to run for one, change of platforms, is really, really important. I think looking at your journey when you're planning and not being constricted is a really good tip. I sometimes have in mind, like I know I want to go to Munich in September, but there's a route that's just come out. Well, actually, it was announced about 6, 7 months ago, and it starts next month, that I really want to try out. So,
which one's that one?
So it's a sleeper train from Brussels through to Prague.
Yes, the new line
Yes, and I'm
coming.
so excited by it because for us, I mean, it's so easy to get to Brussels now. I actually went there for a gig a few months ago because it was so expensive, the gig in London, that it was cheaper for me to get a Eurostar, go and see in Brussels and come home.
Wow.
I thought that was absolutely crackers. But it's so easy for us to get there, and there's a lot of new sleeper routes that are coming out from there. So I would say if you're thinking of doing it, spend time researching, find people who love trains and follow them wherever you can. And if you're thinking of travelling in, say, a set country, sign up to notifications from the rail providers there, because often new routes come out 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even longer in advance before they actually start operating. So you can look and go, oh, I really want to do that journey. How can I build it in either this year, next year, whenever? But just opening yourself out to the information that is out there. So look at the rail passes, see if you're planning to do a holiday, can you travel a bit longer as well? You know, that tip of slowing things down and not trying to do too much each trip is hard in some ways because not everyone has unlimited holiday. I'm very lucky. I can work abroad a little bit if I want to. So that means you can tag on more time, but that's not accessible to everyone. So looking at what you want to get from the journey and planning it round that. And I think if people are sort of not quite sure, I'd say start easy. Start with somewhere you're really comfortable with. Say you've travelled to France in the past and you're like, actually, I know where I'm going. I know a bit of the language because I can dig back into GCSE French, and somewhere that's got slight familiarity. You know, you don't have to chuck yourself in and say, right, I'm going to explore India and I'm only going to use trains. Start small and I think just do it is what I would say to people, because there are enough people out there that you could reach out to. There are companies, so we have train trips. I did this for mine. I looked at Explores London to Marrakesh and I nicked the route. You know, why spend hours thinking, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? I'm like, that looks good. I want to do that. I really want to do London to Istanbul.
Oh, wow. Oh, this is great. We're going to land with with these things. I wanted to reinforce this point that you just mentioned about new routes opening, because I personally think that's so exciting. Europe, I mean, particularly France, Germany, Belgium, they are really going big on train travel, aren't they? And making sure that they're connecting across countries and and so there's, I think, was it France had it was going to connect Paris with 10 capitals across Europe by an X date. There's vision behind train travel in Europe, isn't there? And plans that are now suddenly like they're coming to fruition now. So you mentioned Brussels, Prague. That is like incredibly exciting. Fill us in on anything else you know about that, about Europe and the rails, and then please tell me about that London to Istanbul. That might go right up to the top of my list.
This is the thing when you chat about the journeys, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to go here, there, the other. One of the biggest challenges at the moment is a lot of the train networks across country, and sometimes within countries between different providers, all have different ticketing dates. Some will release their seats 3 months before, some 6, some 4. Eurostar is now 11. It's quite confusing. And I think that's one of the things that countries are talking about, working together to say, actually, can we standardize this somehow? Because they can see that that demand is coming. And it's always really been there. There's some destinations that train travel is huge, but it's now really coming back into that sort of touristic experience for people. So yeah, I think that's almost as exciting as the new routes. I don't know when it will happen. I think we're probably 2-3 years away from it becoming a bit more standardized, but there's a lot of talk about it going on. And I think that is the key to opening up easy travel, because you really at the moment have to wait until your last ticket is available, unless you've got a nice flexible itinerary, which is always the best way to go. But yeah, the London, Brussels, Brussels, Prague, that's in 24 hours. You take a sleeper train from Brussels at about 8:30 in the evening, and you're in Prague at 10:30 the next day. One that's been open for a while but is high on my wish list is London to Stockholm. And that again, it's within 24 hours, you get to Hamburg and then you take a sleeper train up.
Yes, and then you can go from Stockholm, you can get a sleeper train to the Arctic Circle from Stockholm. So that is an amazing one to go to reindeer, snow, the Sami people.
And just the most incredible adventure, when people sometimes think of train travel, they think of the commute, and I commute my train and it's fine, but it's not particularly inspiring. But it's so much more than that. And I think when you hear people talking of those destinations, oh yeah, take a train from the UK to the Arctic Circle, you're like, wow, that's an epic adventure. And I think that's why it's really good to be connected with people who are talking about it. Look at the companies that are doing it. There are some great companies that offer train travel. You don't necessarily have to book with them. You may want to. Take the stress out. Book with someone. Get someone to do the hard work for you is always a great tip. But also use them as you would for any other holiday for a bit of inspiration. Oh, I didn't know I could get the train there. Oh, this route, that route. Also really handy for things like when things aren't quite working. There was a landslip in the Alps at the moment, so the route down into northern Italy is blocked and it's not expected to be open until the end of this summer. And you'll pick up those tips from the websites, either companies that are selling the trips or from Seat 61 when you're looking at routes so you fancy. But yeah, Europe is going to be even better connected.
It's the Spain, Lisbon, Madrid, Lisbon train is waiting to come back, isn't it? I think it used to exist. It stopped in COVID, but it's coming back maybe next year or by the end of this year. I mean, often no one actually knows. But that's going to make a difference. Yeah. London to Lisbon. That would be an amazing.
And then once you're in Portugal, there's a good rail network there as well.
Right. So just tell me about the Istanbul. How are you going to get there? Do you know? Or yeah.
Well, I half know. So we have this trip that's 2 weeks long, which I may well join. Like often I will do these things independently and add a bit of extra time, but there is something really wonderful about having someone who's going to do all that hard work for you. But for me, I've not really explored the Balkans very much, and this route goes through there. So you are going through Croatia, you're tipping through Bosnia, and then you're going further down into Bulgaria, and you fall asleep in Bulgaria and you wake up in Turkey. And I love that thought of going through really changing scenery and destinations, and you're spending time in places. The Balkans they're becoming more popular, but they're still quite unknown to a lot of travelers. So you're not with the big crowds, and there's fantastic, I mean, we've talked, as you say, quite a lot about food, but there's fantastic wine in that region. There's brilliant food, loads of opportunities to get out and connect with those communities. And I think, again, it's just that epic journey for me of feeling like I'm setting off in London and I'm getting to what's known as the gateway to Asia, and you just traveling through a whole different world almost, because each country and each part of the country is so different. You feel like you're having probably 4 or 5 holidays in one.
Yeah, and that's probably the way to do it when people are fitting it into short amounts of time, isn't it? To curate the journey so that the journey is the holiday, almost, with maybe a little bit of time at the destination and coming back, or however it works, but setting it up so that when it's not sort of 24 hours or 48 hours and you're there, that actually the travel bit becomes an important part of the holiday, and it is a time of relaxing and recharging, even though you're traveling.
Definitely. And I think there's similar to your journey and your experience of reading books along the way, of people have written about sections of that travel, and I really enjoy that too, when you can see someone else's perspective, either in a similar time period to you or that historical look back to see, well, what's changed. And sometimes I really like the fact that very little has changed. It's just this method of transport that we've been using for so long, and that still forms such an important part of everyday life for a lot of people who are using it to commute or to see friends and family.
Hannah, what an inspiration. That's been absolutely fantastic. What's your kind of final pointers for people? If someone right now is like, right, summer, oh, I haven't actually got, or maybe a half term, or if you're not restricted by school holidays, October is often great time to travel, isn't it? If they're thinking, this evening I'm going to do a bit of research, what would you say?
Absolutely, do it. Sit down with a cup of tea, and I would say think of where you might want to go, somewhere you might want to go back to, somewhere you've never been, somewhere you look at on the map and like, I wonder what that place is, I've never heard of it. And then do some research. Start with the seat61.com website. That is such a great resource, and you could then pick a country and say, right, I want to go to France, I want to go to Spain, what's around there, and just start embracing that idea. And I would just say, do it. Even if you're a little bit unsure, pick a simple journey to start with and have a go, because personally I think once you've tried it, it's really hard to go back. And it doesn't mean that all of your holidays are going to be rail journeys forevermore, although I quite like that idea myself. But it just means it opens up a whole different way of travelling. So yeah, get a map, look down and almost go, right, that looks good. Could I get there?
How would I do it? I love it. Thank you, Hannah. Probably on the day that this is released, and then when people listen to it, we're going to have a lot of people sitting down with their cups of tea and their maps, dreaming. And that is part of what travel is about, isn't it? Dreaming and then experiencing the world and growing as people and creating memories. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Great British Foreign Affairs podcast, where Britain meets the world. Subscribe today, share it with a friend or colleague, and be part of shaping Britain's role on the global stage.